check. Chairman Rivera, you are now live.
Very good. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it. Let's call the Public Works and Utilities Committee for June 27th, 2022 to order. We have a roll call, please, Ms. Diaz.
Councilor Lee Garcia.
He texted me that he'd be about 5-10 minutes late.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
Present.
Councilwoman Romero Worth.
I'm here.
Councilwoman Amanda Chavez.
He's excused.
And Chairman Rivera.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Yeah. Next is approval of the agenda. Any changes from staff, Director Wheeler?
No changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
All right, anything from the committee?
Move to approve.
Quick question. Mr. Chair, I did notice that there are several items that are fiscal related that aren't going to finance. These items are JKL, MNOPQRS. And given that these contracts, or one is the AFSCME agreement, I would assume that has a fiscal impact as well. Do these need to go to the Finance Committee for their review and approval?
Director Wheeler, is there a reason that they're all bypassing finance?
Thank you, Chairman. I actually didn't catch that so quickly. JKL,
JKLMNOPQR.
I might recommend that it be best to ask staff on the item about that.
All right, so then we'll have to pull each item. Councilor Omar Worth, were you aware?
Some of these did come to finance, didn't J and K and I don't think N did.
Well,
So I'm sorry, Councilor Garcia, give me the numbers again, the letters again.
J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R.
I think some of them did come to finance, but I'd have to go back. I wish I'd known this ahead of time. I could have certainly gotten that answer. And I don't know what the timing issues on are these, if there's some reason why they have to stay on their current path.
yep. Well, we can pull them up.
I mean, I think, if there's an issue, we can certainly, if there is time and they didn't come to finance and people want them to, we can certainly refer them back at the governing body meeting. I just would hate to take them off their path if there is some overarching reason why they didn't. And a few of these I feel like did.
Chairman, Division Director is here to answer your questions if you'd like.
Sure.
Hi, good evening, Chairman, members of the committee. So we did float the question to our city attorney, and she came back with us because right now it's an uncommon circumstance making it necessary for the governing body to consider an active item with a period of time that is insufficient to permit it to go through committee review process, but sufficient to make the notice requirements of the Open Meetings Act. In our case, it is an emergency for unforeseen circumstances, and it will likely result in a gap of service or substantial financial loss to the city. So we did float the question to the city attorney, and so we are able to put it, not go to finance because we have a deadline on these contracts.
Thank you. And are all these items yours, all the ones mentioned, are they your contracts?
Yes,
And they're all under the same circumstance?
that is correct.
Okay. Is that all?
Chairman, except for item N, as in Nancy, I believe, and maybe Director Salazar.
Mr. Chairman, this one is a timing issue. It was approved by both the city management team and AFSCME on Thursday. So in order for the AFSCME bargaining unit to not miss out on the pay increases, that's the reason for the timeline. And this was also approved, it's exactly what was approved through the budget cycle.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sanchez, or Director Sanchez and Director Salazar. Appreciate that. We did have a motion for approval of the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries. Now we're on to the approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items that, or any changes from staff?
No changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
Any items committee members would like to pull off? Councilor Michael Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to pull item F and H.
F and H. Anyone else? All right, what are the wishes of the committee?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
The motion for approval is amended with a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, any abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries. Next is approval of the minutes from June 6, 2022, Public Works and Utilities Committee. Any changes from staff?
No changes from staff, Mr. Chair.
Anything from the committee? Wishes of the committee?
Move to approve. Second.
Motion for approval for the minutes with a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries. Now we're on to presentation and informational items. The first one is item A. Ms. Diaz, will you read that into the record, please?
Update regarding water delivery infrastructure and priority pipeline replacement program. That's Jesse Roach.
Director Roach, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Appreciate your time this evening. A question was asked to us regarding how we decide which mains to replace, and so I wanted to bring an informational item to the committee that talks about what we call our priority line replacement, how that fits into our asset management plan, and how that fits into our capital improvement plan. So our capital improvement plan, we split into sort of three buckets related to existing and new assets. So we have entirely new infrastructure, such as the San Juan Chama Return Flow Project. We have improvements or enhancements to existing infrastructure. So an example of that is the Canyon Road Water Treatment Plant flocculation sedimentation project that we're working on. And then we have just maintenance of existing infrastructure, and so that's our asset management plan, and the priority line replacement program fits into that. And that's what I'm going to focus on in this discussion. A couple things to point out. We have an asset management plan which started out with an inventory of existing infrastructure. And one of the numbers that really kind of popped out to me when I was going through this is that the Water Division has $800 million worth of, an estimated $800 million worth of infrastructure, of which more than half of it is the main. So there's more than $500 million worth of water mains in the ground. And again, that's what I'll be focusing on. In terms of how the distance, the length of these mains, there's over 600 miles of mains, and almost half of them are PVC, and almost the other half of them are iron. So those are the major materials. In this asset management plan, we sort of, and this is, to be clear, this is sort of a initial study and a desktop exercise that suggests, okay, here's the $800 million worth of infrastructure we have, the age of it, and when we should think about replacing it. And kind of the number that I pull away from this, so this is a schedule of what we should be replacing through time from 2020 through 2050. And it's sort of ramping up. And we've been spending that sort of money on asset management through time, but you can see that in the not too distant future, we're going to need to increase that spending. And the total average estimated was $13.5 million a year. that we would be spending just on maintaining our existing infrastructure. Again, not improving or optimizing or adding new infrastructure, just maintaining our existing infrastructure. And you can see the water mains are a big piece of this. So it is an important part of our infrastructure. So the priority line replacement program is a program we've had in place for several years, and we typically budget between $1.5 and $3 million per year, and the focus of that money is to replace mains that are in the ground. And we use a criteria that was developed within the division that sort of looked at, okay, what are the different parameters we might want to consider? And you can see them, what we ended up with listed in order here. The highest weight goes to coordination with other projects. So if the streets is going to repave, then we look and see, is that old infrastructure? That's a good time for us to replace that infrastructure prior to that new asphalt being laid down. The next one, break frequency, the risk of what would happen if it broke. So these are the things that we look at in trying to decide what's the next pipe that we're going to replace. Here's a table showing what we were working on this year. So this is kind of the top 20 priority projects right now based on those weights. And it's just a list of the sort of 4 different projects we are working on this year, the 4 that we have slated for next year, and you know, the other 16 that are in that top 20. Here's a list of the projects that we've completed in the last 4 fiscal years, showing where those were. Not that you know, this is just a table, but I do have a map here also showing that these occur all over the city. And so if you look at the lines in light blue, those were FY18, and darker blue, FY19, purple were in 20 and 21, and then the under construction this year are the orange ones, and planned for next year are the red ones. The other question that I thought I would touch on in this conversation is just looking at how many main breaks we actually have. Clearly, the reason we look at trying to replace these pipes is to try and avoid a main break. And so over the last 7, 8 years, we've averaged about 32 breaks out of our 615 miles of pipe. And so that comes out to about 5 breaks per 100 miles of pipe. And the sort of benchmark standard from AWWA, which is the American Water Works Association, is 15 breaks per 100 miles of pipe. So we do see breaks, and we notice them, and there's some that are really painful, and I know they're painful to counselors, they're painful to the water division, but overall, we are doing a pretty good job of keeping those numbers within sort of industry standard. And then just to show sort of where those breaks have occurred, this was for 2014 through 19, and not much to take away from this map other than these breaks occur all over the city. There's not an obvious pattern or something that we could anticipate just with spatial information. So I guess the final piece of this is I wanted to sort of put this in context. So I've been talking about the priority line replacement program, which is part of our asset management plan. We also have this optimization and master planning effort in terms of how can we better use our existing infrastructure, and then we have other feasibility studies that look at potential new infrastructure, feeding those all together with project descriptions, and then we've been working on a ranking tool to try and decide, you know, we only have a certain amount of money and a certain amount of time, which do we do first, which do we do next? And all that feeds into our capital improvement plan, which each year is a list of projects that we want to get done in the current fiscal year, and then 5 years, projecting out 5 years, what are we going to try and get done in the next 5 years. And I guess just to even step out a little bit further, this all fits into our planning process. And so in our planning process, we're working on long-range scenarios, demand, supply, and from that planning process, we get ideas on what's some new infrastructure that we might need, or could we use our existing infrastructure better. So this whole planning process feeds really the left 2 buckets here, the feasibility studies and initiatives, and then optimizing existing infrastructure, and that feeds into our sort of CIP development process. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director. Councilor Romero-Worth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Director Roach, for the presentation. Just two questions. The number of main breaks, that slide, is that a calendar year or is that a fiscal year that you're keeping track?
This graph is showing calendar year, and if it'd be more helpful to you or members of the committee, happy to package it in fiscal year as well.
Okay, and so this year, 2022, isn't on there yet, and we're halfway through the year. How many have we had?
Darn it, you got me. I don't know how many we've had.
Okay.
And as you'll note, there's 30 in a year, and of those, 2 or 3 of them really rise to the level of being noticed. And a lot of them are small service leaks, well, not service leaks, those aren't in here, but are smaller and not as significant as some that we hear about.
Okay. I mean, it does seem like we've had a few lately, and I think it's good to put it in context. So this is helpful in terms of, you know, how many we experience, what's kind of our trajectory, you know, and I guess that leads into my second question, which is overall, how would you characterize, or is it possible to characterize the condition of the system overall? You know, are we investing at the appropriate level? Are we, you know, able to do only what we can do because of budget constraints, but we should be doing more? How do we look at that? How do you look at that?
I think it's a really good question, and I think we're young in this process. In this asset management plan that we developed, we have been, according to this analysis, we have been investing to this point above what is recommended for the mains. But I also think that this asset management plan was looking mostly at age for the mains, and most of our folks who work with the mains will tell you we've got pipes from 1880 that are some of our best pipes because they really high quality pipes when they're in the ground. So we're moving towards implementing an asset management software, and the idea there will be to have the folks in the field having tablets so that when they interact with the pipes, they can take photos, log them in there, do an assessment on the quality. Because I think the place where we haven't connected is going from age to actual infrastructure quality is the step we're in now. But I do take heart that we're at like a third of, let's see, where did I put that? At about a third of what AWWA says is a goal for a fully optimized distribution system. So from that perspective, we're doing well, but there are definitely steps we need to take.
And is there federal money to help us do this stuff? Will there be federal money?
Counselor, that's a good question. I'm not an expert on the buckets of federal money. I'm guessing there will be, but I don't know. It hasn't been brought to my attention yet if there's specific money that we'll really want to sort of try and funnel into this particular program.
Okay. And I just want to thank you. I know I've been noticing more alerts when these have happened and more notice to the public of what to do. I know that I think Councilor Garcia and I both have gotten calls. I certainly, not just this year, but in past years, had gotten calls, people very concerned when the water comes out of the drain brown, and what do they do, and there's a lot of panic. And so I appreciate kind of the doubling down on letting the public know where the breaks are, what to do if you have brown water. And maybe since you have the platform and you're recording, can you just tell the public what they do if brown water comes out because there's a main break?
Sure, thank you. So brown water can be a result of a main break. It can be a result of rapid flow through the system for other reasons as well. When you see brown water, it's generally still safe to drink. Of course, you don't want to drink it, but you want to flush your cold water until the water clears up.
And try not to use your hot water, because then you're just drawing it into your water heater, right? Okay, then I pass. I could tell somebody what to do. Mr. Chair, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Michael Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jesse, for the presentation. I think it was the slide before this one. No, it was the asset.
Probably getting confused. This one?
Yes, sir, that's the one. So, in particular, I kind of zoned in on 2041, given the sharp increase, which about, from here, it looks about $37 million in spending proposed that year. And I'm kind of zeroing in on the, it looks like the storage tanks. And everything else seems to kind of gradually increase and decrease, whereas there is a huge, are we replacing every storage tank there? What's the plan there? Because that too can really put us in a big position. And I know that's roughly 20 years out, but why are we planning to have such a steep increase in that particular replacement plan?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, that's a good question, and it's the first thing that grabbed my eyes as well. And I believe that that is two large water tanks slated for replacement. And again, this is a plan, but as you noted, it's 20 years out, and as we get closer, we're already looking, and I would say storage tanks, so this could be the 10 million gallon tank and the hydro tank, two of our larger storage tanks. Those are tanks that we have divers in every year and that we're constantly monitoring. So it's a huge piece of infrastructure, but it's also something that we, unlike the pipes in the ground, we do have a very good sense of the condition of that infrastructure. And so in this case, in this exercise, those lifetimes landed right there. But we would certainly anticipate as we get closer or as we start to see deterioration, either rehabbing or replacing sooner or later, depending on the status.
Okay. I mean, I would like for us to, given, if you look at 2040 and 2042, there's no replacements planned for that year, where even if we shifted some of that around, it might help us with the fiscal impact of that. I know 20 years out is a long time, but to me, 2020 or 2012 seems just like yesterday, and 2042 is going to be here like it's tomorrow. So I don't want the folks in 2042 to say, what the heck were they thinking? Where are we going to come up with this money? So we can figure out how to make that impact not so stressful on our fiscal budget. That would be great. My other question was around the weighting of how you prioritize the replacements. And I see pipe age at 0%. I know you mentioned we've got some pretty fantastic pipes from 1880, but I would think that when you look into the pipes that were installed mid last century, those pipes are probably failing. And so why is pipe age at 0%? I would even think it would have some type of factor into the replacement weight. So why 0?
Councilor, it's a good question. I would say that this weighting came from the guys who work on the pipes and looking at where they're breaking. If Director Jones wants to add anything to this, I welcome it. But really, I think one way to look at this is that half of the weighting goes to the break frequency and the coordination with other projects. So I think break frequency is certainly something that we would agree would be important. I was also somewhat surprised that for us, when we start looking at where the break's occurring, it doesn't correlate very well with age. So that, I guess, is ultimately the reason is this is local, our in-house expert opinion, and that's what we're working with now. On the other hand, that asset management plan schedule that I showed you, I believe is mostly based on age. So we have to bring those things together.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the clarification. It's learning a lot. I mean, learning that we've got, is it scuba divers that go in these tanks to go and check? I mean,
They do. Sterilized scuba divers.
Wow, I didn't know that. Well, thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate it. No other questions, Mr. Chair.
Councilor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just maybe a follow-up on that. Is there any technology out there that allows you to go through the water mains and X-ray and do it like that? Just, you're able to send divers into the tanks, but main water, send something down and identify which ones have bigger probability of stress cracks, fractures, something like that?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Lee Garcia, I think that's an excellent question, and it's a question that I have asked. At this point, I know there is camera technology for at least some of our larger mains that might allow some inspection. And that's a direction that we'll need to go as we move from this sort of desktop approach to our asset management plan to actually deciding, okay, what are we going to replace next year, and adding that to this information that we already have. So I do think that's the big hole for us is how do we figure out the quality of the pipes in the ground, and I think that's a good suggestion, and there is technology, I believe, but we haven't explored it very well yet.
That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Roach, I think it's slide 8 of 12. Kind of cuts off just south of Siringo Road. Has there been any other replacements south and west of that?
I believe it cuts off here because that's all the replacements that happened in this period of time, but I don't know if Director Jones, if you have any notion that there's been others. These are the only ones that I'm aware of.
Mr. Chair, not off the top of my head can I remember a specific project that's outside that. I will mention, I'm familiar with the study that was done on that quadrant when the Buckman direct diversion came on, because it does enter into that lower part. And there was a lot of work done on the blending study and the conditional assessment. So even going back to Councilor Lee Garcia's point, there's other indicators than just the X-ray or the video, which are prime tools. But actually you're doing conditional assessments of what we call a coupon. So every time a main is tapped, whether it's a replacement or even a service line, it gives you a coupon that's received from that tap, which is a great tool for assessing the condition of that pipe. What does it look like on the inside and outside, the thickness. And during that blending study of how Buckman direct diversion water being introduced into the city, so the reverse flow and the conditional assessment, there were multiple coupons that were analyzed in those areas to also look at the conditional assessment. So I did want to add that, but to direct your question, I can't speak to a specific project for a mainline replacement on that area.
All right, thank you. And then lastly, do master meters requested from the county fit into our asset management plan, or are those separate?
Chair Rivera, that's a good question. Those master meters would be meters that we own, so they would be part of the asset management plan.
Okay, and when they're requested, are they placed within the county or within city limits?
I would say right at the boundary, but it could be corrected.
Mr. Chair, typically it would be at the boundary of the service area. There are exceptions to that when you look at the location of where the actual meter would be installed. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on the boundary. So there are some that could venture into the city service area or venture slightly into the county service area.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Director. Any other follow-up questions? Thank you, Director Roach, appreciate it. We're on to our second presentation. Ms. Diaz, will you read that into the record, please?
Environmental Services Residential Route Optimization and Plan Collection Date Changes effective August 15th, 2022. This is Shirlene Sayin.
Director Sin, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Rivera. Good evening, members of the committee. Here to change everyone's trash day, and so I know that's kind of terrifying. But I'm going to walk you through why and the benefits of it and how we're going to communicate it, and hopefully we'll have a great result on the other side of this project. So the first thing we did was a route optimization project. It was something that we wrote into our contract with our technology provider, Rubicon. So a route optimization is, right, if you can imagine when routes were first drawn for residential collection, they were probably pretty even and balanced. And then right? The city grows and physical conditions on the ground change, roads change, all kinds of things might happen. And as you all know, like we have had tremendous growth in certain areas, and definitely those tend to be in our areas that are currently our Friday collection day. And so some of those routes have gotten really long, and they're difficult to complete, and those days are really hard for our drivers. So it's just good form every few years to do an optimization project and rebalance your routes when you experience that kind of growth. And so that's what we did. We started with that. And so for something like that, you start out by identifying what your goals are. And this is just a snapshot of really all of these were part of our goals, from balancing how many hours each driver is on each route to adjusting our days of service. So in working with Rubicon, we started with establishing those goals, and then they have been collecting baseline data for almost 4 years, right? We have real-time GPS in all of the trucks. They follow the whole route. They know how many times each truck dumps on each route, how many average hours it takes to complete a route. And so, having that kind of information is amazing. And so you gather the real information from those 4 years of collection on the routes. And then the technology side, people at Rubicon, they start taking those parameters and constraints and doing computer simulations and helping us to create new routes that will meet our goals and meet our needs. And so that's what we have done. And one of the things we asked them to do, we've been looking really, ever since I've been here, at the possibility of moving to a 4-day collection schedule. So that would take our residential operators, and I want to stress that we're not talking about commercial. Commercial is collected 6 days a week, and nothing about this route optimization affects commercial collections. But from the residential side, our operators currently work a typical 8-hour workday, Monday through Friday. And so looking at a 4-day collection schedule, that would take them to a 4-day work week with 4 tens, what we call 4 tens, right, 10 hours a day. So we have the same 40 hours to collect the same houses. I want to stress that. There's no cutback on service. It's just a redistribution of how we're collecting it. And doing that allows us several advantages. Really, one of our top advantages is an ability to improve our maintenance on a residential fleet. So we have had no luck to this point creating alternate mechanic schedules, right? It was hard enough before COVID, and now we all know how hard it is to hire people, and mechanics and CDL operators, there is so much competition. So we haven't really had much success in filling vacant mechanic positions or creating alternate hours because we only have the 1-bay shop. So by doing this, all of our residential fleet will be on the ground at our site on Fridays, and we can start scheduling preventative maintenance and scheduled maintenance for our residential fleet. Also, we can move we have truck washing that occurs on Saturdays, and we have to bring in a CDL driver for that, so we can eliminate some overtime and move that to Fridays. So we have those operational advantages to 410s. But then we have some other advantages that you might not think of right away. First of all, this 4-day-a-week schedule allows us to have our residential operators will be able to observe city-observed holidays, but we will still collect all of the trash within the week. So having a 1-day open to move things around, we'll be able to do a holiday schedule, and I'll talk about that a little more coming up. But I mentioned how tight the competition is for CDL drivers. Having a 3-day weekend for operators, we feel like will be a morale boost. We'll probably have less call-ins on Fridays or Mondays, especially during hunting season. So we feel like that'll be a good morale boost. A lot of our operators, they have side jobs, they have ranches, they have things they do. So this allows them a little bit more time to work on those things. And we also are eliminating a commute day for those drivers. And many of them commute in. We have drivers that come in from Albuquerque, Penasco, Pecos. So this reduces a lot of miles driven. So again, that's another advantage that we can offer our employees. We even have, in some of our surveys, we found that we had a few where they would be able to eliminate some childcare costs for 1 day a week. So there's some great advantages we feel like we can offer our employees, and maybe we can attract and fill we have about 8 open driver positions at the moment. So we're hoping we can make this very attractive. And it's not huge, but once we optimize our routes, we're eliminating a lot of trips to the landfill and also those commute days, and so that does have some carbon reduction. Right now we have a preliminary estimate of about 5 metric tons. It's not huge, but it's something, and that's moving us towards our sustainability goals. And here's an example. Right now we're down 38% for the computer simulation estimates of what our trash routes miles driven will be. We're not really seeing such a dramatic number on recycling because the recycling facility is so much closer to our yard than the landfill. But we're able to eliminate all of the trips on Friday, or the 5th day, to the landfill because we have to dump the truck at the end of the shift, but it's usually not full. So what our simulations show is that when the drivers have that second dump, they'll actually be full, and we're just eliminating all of those miles driven on that 5th collection day. Hopefully that makes sense. So we're pretty excited about that. And then I just provided you, and I actually have print versions of these too, if you'd like. It's exactly this, just for your reference, the comparison. So this is our current 5-day collection schedule, and our new schedule will look like this. So as you can see, obviously everyone in the Friday collection zone is the most affected because they will all have their trash day moved, but for the most part it will move to Thursday, and the southern part of Thursday currently will remain Thursday. And I think the other really big change is about half of Monday. Half of Monday will stay the same, and the other half, those particular residents will change. So this is a big change. There's no doubt about it. So how will this 4-day collection schedule work with holidays? As I mentioned, we can have our drivers observe a holiday, and I provided a couple of examples in the memo and here. So this is what it'll look like, and this is actually a graphic that's designed for a residential calendar, I'll remind you, that we send out every year. So all of this will be in next year's calendar. All the holidays will be noted. So if the holiday's on a Monday, and the first holiday that will occur after our change will be Labor Day. So that will be a Monday. So there would be no collection that Monday, and everybody's day just slides forward. It's pretty simple. We'll continue our educational outreach pretty heavy right through Labor Day, and then we'll have reminders for that coming up in the future. But everybody's day would just shift forward. And if people forget and put their trash out and it doesn't get collected, it'll just get collected the next day. I've been in a city where we did exactly this, and it worked just fine. So another example would be Thanksgiving Day. That holiday would be on a Thursday. So nobody on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday would be affected. Thursday wouldn't get collected, and that would just move to Friday. So hopefully that's pretty clear. That's how the holidays will work, and that's why we drop off Friday, because if you try to drop off a different day, then you don't have enough days left in the week to shift the schedule. But this way, we can observe holidays and still get all the trash picked up within the week. Our implementation plan is that these new routes will go live on August 15th. The collection will begin at 7 a.m. We do have one ordinance change that will be required, and I have that scheduled to come through, and you'll be seeing that in the next few weeks. It's probably the smallest ordinance change ever, but we'll just be changing the 8 o'clock to 7 a.m. So in order to complete those 410s on time, we'll need to start at 7 a.m. And that's pretty standard industry practice, actually. And we have been putting 7 a.m. in our outreach material for a long time. So hopefully people are used to that, but we'll promote that heavily as well. And just throughout the first couple of weeks, we know it'll be tough, and we'll have some planned capacity for urgent missed collections. We'll have people on standby. We'll try to get things on Fridays in those first couple of weeks that really need to be collected. If they didn't get the message, hopefully they will. We'll talk about the outreach plan in just a second. And we also have a plan for some all-hands office help. We can't increase our number of phone lines, but we can increase the number of people on our that can be added to our email system, and all of our phone messages go to our email system. So we'll be able to, we have some plans on how to increase that capacity. I want to take a second and talk about Recycle Coach. Can I have hands of anybody who has their Recycle Coach downloaded? So Recycle Coach, it is free. We pay for it. A free app for users. It is amazing. It's full of information. We don't have a lot of usage on it, even though we have it in most all of our outreach material. But this is exactly what it's made for. If you'll download your Recycle Coach app, it will tell you when your trash and recycling collection day is. If you allow push notifications, it will send you reminders. Whenever you, like if you want a reminder the day before, it will send you reminders. It's absolutely set up for holidays and things like that, so you can set it up to remind you if you have a change with a holiday. But it is also full of great information. This is where the What Goes Where tool lives. So we have a direct link to that on our website. You can go to our website. When you search the What Goes Where, that's actually our Recycle Coach database. But you can do that on the app. You can say, hey, what's the address of the drop-off site? And it'll tell you. You can ask, what do I do with this old TV? And it'll tell you what you can do with that. It has a ton of information, and we'll really be pushing people to download the Recycle Coach app. The only issue is that it can only hold one database at a time. So it'll hold our current database, and we're going to switch it over the week before on August 7th. So if you already have the app, you'll just need to re-enter your address. You'll need to update it and re-enter your address. Or if you'd like, you can wait till after August 7th to download it. But you don't have to wait. You'll just need to, you'll need to update or re-enter your address. And then it'll show the new database, and it'll show you your new trash and recycling collection day. So we're going to have this on all of our outreach, and that's going to be the easiest way, I think, that people can find their new trash and recycling collection day. But we'll have maps on the website and all of our outreach material. So we actually just put some information on the web page, and I think it's live now. If not, it'll be live tomorrow morning. So we'll start. We have the static map. Our great GIS department's done tons of great work for us, and we may still be tweaking some maps and things, but Leonard has created an interactive map. It needs a little more work, but it is there, and you can search your address if you can't tell from the printed map. So most people should be able to tell what day they're in, but if people are in one of the boundary areas and they're not sure about their day, we'll have a searchable interactive map. Plus, we'll have a static map on the website that does show roads, and hopefully between that or the Recycle Coach app after August 7th, it'll be easy for people to find their collection day. We have a long list of things we're going to be doing, but this is just a highlight. We will have utility bill stuffers will start arriving in people's mailbox July 7th, and it'll cover the whole monthly billing cycle, so everyone will receive that. It's not quite done, so I didn't want to drop it in, but there will be map, the Recycle Coach information, the holiday information, and then we're working on it so people can keep it, and it'll actually have an updated calendar pages with the holidays, so people can just put a magnet and stick it on their fridge or wherever it is that people keep their reminders. So that'll be in the utility bill cycle of July. Then we will do a direct mailer. I have the last week of July, maybe the first week of August, but there'll be a direct mailer to every address. That will also, it will look a lot like this. So people will get the map and how to find their new collection day. I've already recorded some radio spots, and we'll record some more this week, so we'll have all the Hutton stations in Suave running radio spots for a little over a month. We'll have ads at the Santa Fe Place Mall and video screens of Hutton. Of course, will be all the free stuff that we can do and think of, and maybe you know some things that I haven't thought of, but of course, social media posts, ads, our weekly wrap, whatever newsletters and email lists that I have a list of them, but if you have some that I might not have thought of, please let me know. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have really, we'll keep hitting it heavy. We have a second radio ad that will start running after August 19th, which is the Friday. So that it'll have gone through the first week of the collection change. And then the second radio ad will focus on the holiday change. So hopefully between that, and I tried to give you a really thorough background in the memo so that as this comes closer, that you have something you can reference easily. And I want to stress that if you have any questions now or later, please contact me, and I will reach out to the other counselors with the presentation and the information in the memo, and I am at your service to answer questions, and we'll all get through this, and it's going to be a great change. I know change is hard, and I'm not saying that no mistakes will be made or no resident will be confused, but we have the best plan that we can come up with, and again, we welcome your input for for ways to improve it, and it'll be great at the other side. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Director Sin. Any questions for Director Sin? Councilor Lee Garcia?
I think with that schedule, I want to be a driver Monday through Friday. How does
Please.
I need a CDL first.
We can help with that too.
So pretty much it's just the residential. This affects residential drivers, and all of their staff is pretty much still on a 5-day work week.
Yes, Counselor. All other staff is on a normal Monday through Friday schedule. So I'll be there Monday through Friday, and Eric will be there Monday through Friday. To start with our section supervisors, since they frequently, because we're frequently short drivers, they frequently have to step in and drive a route. So our section supervisors will be working the 410s. But in a perfect world, where we might be able to get all those positions filled, we would probably move our section supervisors back to 5/8, and that would also give them, our residential, time to do interviews and paperwork and things like that. So we would stagger their shifts. So one would be there at the beginning of the day, and the other one would be there at the end of the day.
Thank you. That's all I have. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Director Sitton, so I believe the landfill closes roughly around the same time as this shift would end. Would there be times where trash sits in a vehicle overnight?
At this point, we don't think that to be the case. Director Kippenbrock is aware of this, and we'll continue to work with him. It's one of the reasons we're starting earlier. But really, all of the computer simulations show will be done in plenty of time, because they not only dump, right? They have to come back to the yard, and they have to do the post trip on the truck. So when we say 410s, they're not actually collecting for 10 hours. The shifts are designed to include the beginning and the end of the day of pre and post trip and those things.
All right. Who regulates that? Is it EPA, or like if you did have to have a truck sit overnight with trash in it?
Good question, Counselor. No, I don't think the EPA has any regulations about that, But we would just have to dump it first thing in the morning before starting the shift.
Okay, so there's no regulating department that would cite us for leaving it overnight if we had to, or?
Chair Rivera, that's a good question. None that I know of, and I've never run into that, but I will research that and make sure that's the case.
Okay. You talked about maintenance and really having your current one bay. Is one bay enough? I mean, if you have a truck that's down and being worked on, how do you do preventive maintenance on the other unit?
Thank you for the question, Councilor Rivera. They are either in and out. We do have a lot of vendors that we have on contract to help with maintenance. So we can send them for preventative maintenance to our vendors on that day. And some of those things are things that they can do outside. And so there are, weather permitting and depending on what the operation is, there are things that they can do outside of the bay. But thank you for reminding everyone that that one bay is not enough, and we will be coming back to you soon after this implementation to talk about our plans for a new building and a shop with more capacity.
All right. And on that same kind of line of questioning, do you need more vehicles, or do we have enough vehicles to implement this without any issues?
Another excellent question. That it was part of the parameters I discussed at the top of the optimization of how many vehicles and how many drivers. So when we asked them to do a comparison of the 4-day and 5-day, that was our number one question. Can we do the 4-day with the same amount of drivers and trucks that we have? And so the average driver number that we're using is 17. So sometimes we might have more. I mean, we do have, people are retiring. We have some people retiring this summer. Sometimes people just move on to a higher paying job or a different job, and then some people come in. So it's never super static, but 17 is our average number, and so that's what this optimization was based on. But we would like to have more positions filled that would allow us to have backup drivers and make sure that people could take their vacations and time off, and we would have a much easier time scheduling those things.
How many backup vehicles do you have?
I'm going to throw that one to Eric. 6 residential?
6 residential backup. Okay. And you said, I think I heard you say that this has been approved by AFSCME, by the union, the schedule change?
Thank you for the question. We have discussed it with them over the past couple of years. We've done 2 driver surveys, but according to AFSCME regulations, we will give them a notice within, I believe it's a 2-week window. But we have given them that notice. It's been a while since before we started the optimization, but we will give them that notice as required.
And then for the residents, if somebody misses a day when they first start, is there going to be a plan to make sure that they're taken care of because they didn't know or whatever reason they have?
We know that in the first couple of weeks that we're there. We're hoping most people will actually get the message or just see that everyone else is putting their trash out. I don't know how many people might be missed, and so I don't know that we can get everyone, and it's why I said in our plan, we're planning to cover the most urgent. So if it's not, we will talk to people and we'll talk them through it, and if it's not super urgent, then hopefully they can wait. We will have all hands on deck throughout the week, and then look at those first 2 Fridays to also make up missed collections that are urgent, and we can get a lot on those Fridays. So that one, I can't say exactly whether every single person, but we would want to address the most urgent ones.
All right, and then lastly is your apartment complexes. Are those considered commercial or are those residential?
Yes, Councilor Rivera, those are mainly commercial.
Commercial, so they wouldn't be affected at all. They would still.
No, commercial collections will not be affected.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you, Ms. Sitton. Director Sitton.
Thank you.
All right, our next presentation, item C. Ms. Diaz, will you read that into the record, please?
Roadway and Trails Capital Projects Status Report.
Welcome.
Mr. Chair, Rivera, members of the committee, good evening. My name is Romela Gloriosa Moss. I'm a senior project administrator in Roadway and Trail section under Engineering Division, which on July 1st will be called Complete Streets Division. I'm here today to talk about Public Works, Roadway and Trails capital projects. As you can see in your list that is included in your packet, we have 16 roadway and trails projects, of which 9 are roadway projects. These are mostly our reconstruction projects to include bicycle lanes, ADA compliant sidewalks, stormwater drainage improvements. 3 are intersection improvements, 2 of which are roundabouts, and 4 trail projects. All these 16 projects are in different phases of project development. Some are in study phase, design phase, and construction phase. But the goal is to construct all these 16 projects. For this year, there are 5 projects that are scheduled to be constructed. We started with Camino, Entrada, Roundabout. We started constructing this project in February of this year, and we are anticipating to complete this project by October of this year. The second project to be constructed is the Cañada Rincon Trail, which we estimate to start construction sometime in August, followed by the Guadalupe Street reconstruction and Guadalupe Street Bridge deck rehabilitation sometime in October, and the same month is the Agua Fria South Meadows intersection improvements. All these projects are fully funded. Next year, we will start with El Camino Real Academy Trail, followed by Agua Fria Cottonwood intersection improvements. Both these projects will be constructed early spring. And then Harrison Road Sidewalk and Lighting Project and the Tierra Contenta Trail Extension Project. 3 of these projects are fully funded, except the Agua Fria Cottonwood intersection improvements. We may need another $1.6 million to construct this project, but we are going to apply for this funding in September from HSIP. It's a federal funding. In 2024, another 4 projects are scheduled to be constructed. We start with Sandoval Montezuma, followed by the Acequia Trail Extension, which is fully funded, Paseo del Sol West, and the St. Michael's Drive Rail Trail Underpass. The St. Michael's Drive Trail Underpass, we may need another $2 million to construct it, but again, we will have federal funding to construct this project. These 3 projects none of these 3 projects are funded for construction, but as soon as we finish the design, we will apply for construction funding, which includes the Henry Lynch Road reconstruction, the Bishop's Lodge Road reconstruction, and the Arroyo de los Chamisos crossing, which is a major project. This project may cost us $20.6 million. In total, in today's dollars, if we construct these 16 projects, it's worth $84 million and $40,000, which provides safety, equity, convenience, economic development, healthier environment, and better quality of life. We have secured almost $38 million. All our projects for construction for this year are fully funded. 95% of our funding is external funds. So we don't stop on these projects. We plan for our projects. For example, these 3 projects are partially funded by legislative or capital outlay projects or capital outlay funding. So we are still waiting for these funds to be released. Like, for example, St. Michael's Drive reconstruction, we had $350,000 grant from legislature in 2021. So as soon as we receive this funding, we will start the design. There are some projects that are listed in our ICIP, SFMPO Transportation Plan, and IFCIP. We need to prepare for the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act funding that the government is rolling out early next year. So to implement these projects, we have our partners, which is the Santa Fe Metropolitan Planning Organization, headed by Mr. Eric Oni, the Bicycling and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, headed by or chaired by Councilor Michael Garcia. Most of our funding is administered by NMDOT, and we also partner with other city departments and divisions like land use and affordable housing. With that, thank you for listening, and I stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Glorioso Mas? I had one question about Agua Fria and Cottonwood. So back when John Romero was still here, I think that was fully funded at one point, and it was supposed to, they were moving the roundabout to Fairway Village, and they were going to reconstruct how people from Cottonwood came out. Fairway Village didn't like that, so it set the plan backwards. But what happened to the funding?
Because every year construction cost is going up and up, especially this past 2 years. We lack another $1.6 million, but we were promised by EDSIP that come September we will get that funding. The hiccup is in the right-of-way acquisition. We are still negotiating with one property owner to acquire right-of-way. And most of these projects, the design is complete, and we're ready for final approval from NMDOT. But before we can do that, we need to obtain right-of-way certification. And some of these projects, like for example, Agua Fria South Meadows, we are negotiating with 11 property owners, and only 3 are settling with us another. So that's the hiccup of many of these projects. And if you don't construct this project, for example, this year, then the construction cost is higher the following year. Like 3 of our projects this year, we went back to our funding, went back to the federal government to request for additional funding.
Director Wheeler, will the federal dollars that are coming down be able to fund some of these projects since they're already pretty much shovel-ready?
Thank you so much for the question, Chairman. I do want to add, so NMDOT has actually let us know that our level of funding will not increase likely from the Infrastructure Jobs Act. And I think if you drive around the state, you'll understand why. They're rebuilding US 285 from border all the way back down, and that was in desperate need. It's really funny when you drive on it now to think that that was our US 285. So I think what NMDOT is doing is they're also constructing 3 huge projects in Santa Fe that won't cost us anything. One of them is the Cerrillos Road reconstruction between St. Michael's Drive and St. Francis, so that 1.5 miles of roadway there is being completely reconstructed thanks to some pretty intensive involvement from Ramella, myself, and Eric Ani. We've gotten them to add much wider sidewalks, much better bike lanes. Melissa McDonald and her team has helped us to get really great stormwater infrastructure, some low-impact design green infrastructure incorporated into that project. So NMDOT is funding that. It's like a $20 million project in itself. They're also reconstructing Hyde Park Road, so they're in the study phase right now and looking to make it much safer for pedestrians, bicycles, and vehicular traffic. And they're also working on the St. Mike, St. Francis interchange improvements. And so they're getting close to starting design. We're selecting preferred alternatives there. So I think what DOT is doing with the Infrastructure Jobs Act money is pouring it into the state as they see fit on their projects, where I think it's greatly needed. But as Ramella says, she has a fantastic relationship. We are in close communication and coordination with DOT, as well as all the federal funding, and MPO helps us. And so anytime there is money available, we do really well in those grant applications. And we also leverage our impact fees as well for like gap funding. So if we need $500,000 to get something over the finish line, we can go to our impact fees. Those come in for the road funds at about $2.5 million a year. It's not a huge number, but it's just that amount that we need to get these over the line and have what we need to construct them. So, and then of course there is the legislative funding that Ramella mentioned, but we haven't been able to get that since 2021 due to our situation. So we're leveraging all the different kinds of funds that we can. And then there's GRT bond. As soon as we can do that, again, we could incrementally fund some projects that are ready to go.
Ms. Gloria Somas, you said something about potentially having the funding available for Agua Fria Cottonwood in September. Will you keep myself and Councilor Lee Garcia up to date on whether that funding is approved?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next we're on presentation D. Go ahead, Ms. Diaz.
Traffic calming request report, Leroy Pacheco.
Hello, Chairman, and thank you so much for being here, Leroy. I'd like to start this presentation off if I could. So traffic calming is one of the efforts that we take in the engineering division in Public Works. Since we haven't had an engineering division director since September 2020, I've been leading that team, and we couldn't have made it this far without the help of Leroy Pacheco. He was an engineering supervisor in that division for years and was generous enough to come back from retirement to support us in this particular process, as well as others important services that this division provides. I thought I would give you an overview of how traffic calming requests work. So what happens is that somebody senses that there's speeding in their neighborhood and they're concerned about safety and they want the city to do something. The first thing they do is usually send an email to somebody or do submit a work order request or contact our counselors, obviously. And then that comes into the system, and we put them in touch with Daniel Diaz at Constituent Services. And Daniel has a really great email that we all worked on together that introduces a constituent to the traffic calming process. And I'm actually going down the path of one particular, and Leroy's going to tell you a little bit about how some of these requests shake out, because not every single traffic calming request goes in the same route. But the very classic one that you might be familiar with goes in this process. So Daniel lets the constituent know about the traffic calming process, which was adopted by governing body. It requires that a number of neighbors in the neighborhood all agree that there's a problem and they'd like to see it addressed. They submit a request with signatures to the city. Given that, then we do undertake engineering analysis of the situation. We do traffic counts, and we see, is there speeding there? Are there issues we need to address? So that's the big trigger. People get their neighbors together. They get a certain percentage of them, of people that are affected, and then we get to work on the project. And so Leroy has been leading that effort for us, and then we also have Wilson and Company under contract to do the traffic engineering that needs to be stamped by a traffic engineer. And so we get a number of these in, and Leroy's going to give you a report. It's also in your packet, some of the numbers. Then when we come after that point, we say either we didn't detect speeding in your neighborhood, so there was the traffic counts show that there wasn't speeding. We measure cut-through traffic and those kinds of things. Or we come back and say, you know what, we measured speeding, and this is what we'd recommend as a solution, or one or two. And then the people take it back to their neighbors and get a vote of the neighbors affected to say, like 70% of the neighbors have to say, yep, we'd like to see that implemented in our neighborhood, because you'd be surprised, and I didn't believe this, and John Romero told me it would happen, every time we do anything that a constituent requests for traffic, the next day someone asks us to take it down. I don't care if it's no parking signs, if it's a stop sign, if it's a speed bump. It's so funny because you really feel from listening to the constituent like you've heard the requests of the community, and every time we act without a process like this, we the next day end up really in a pickle where people don't want it there. So we're really diligent about following the process, and it's really been working. And I'd like to, I just report and kind of steal some of your thunder some more, is that I got to go to the Las Acequias Neighborhood Association meeting last Friday night or Thursday night, and let them know that the traffic calming that they've been requested on Calle Tahoe, near the park, will be built by the city for them as soon as we possibly can. And they were really excited to hear that. They had been working for about a decade to have us address the situation there, and they got some great turnout from their community. It's like 200 votes or something like that about the issue. They activated their community, and so we're really happy to be implementing that traffic calming that they requested. And so that's just kind of my sort of from where I'm sitting. Leroy's much closer to the action, and he can give you a little bit more resolution about some of the requests and how they're handled. And what that looks like.
Well, thank you, Regina. You're a hard act to follow. I think I'd start with saying I've been under contract this fiscal year for about 16 hours a week to support Regina in two areas, traffic engineering with respect to traffic calming and with respect to development review through land use and development. And most of the city's new infrastructure does, or much of the city's new infrastructure does come in through development, and so there's an interconnection between what developers are doing, planning and constructing, and what built infrastructure the community's reacting to. Traffic calming itself is a broad term that, sometimes gets a bit in a fog. For instance, sometimes people think it's a stop sign, crosswalk. Really, in a general sense, a lot of that is traffic calming. However, the city has a 22-year-old traffic calming policy that was adopted by the governing body in 2000 after an enormous planning process, revised and adopted again in 2004, and revised and adopted again in 2013. And so in a certain sense, this is kind of the thread that's weaving through our traffic calming public process that has been critical, especially in this time when the city adopted this. There was actually a traffic calming section with 4 city staff doing traffic counting, engineering, planning, et cetera. Right now, Regina is handling a team that's very interdisciplinary. It's constituent services, land use engineering with Dee Beinsinger, 2 consulting engineers, myself and Wilson and Company. With Public Works, we work closely with Jose Verma and Mark Barella in Signal Shop and Sign Shop. Amanda Archuleta with our administration. The MPO is basically acting as our long-range planning component. So it's kind of amazing that under Regina's leadership, we're actually able to hit all these buttons, and hopefully, I'll share my spreadsheet with you quickly. I don't have the connectivity of the overhead, but one of the main ways that the traffic engineering issues come to the forefront is through constituent services. This past fiscal year, we've tracked 89 specific CRM requests that came through and were assigned to traffic engineering Public Works. We feel that tracking this, we've closed about 41% of those requests. They range from stop sign CRMs, crosswalk request CRMs, signal CRMs. CRMs, it stands for constituent, I don't know what, I'm using an acronym people may not know. We're getting a lot of requests for speed radar signs. Many of these recurring patterns of requests have evolved in the need to do corridor studies. We've done one when John Romero was here on Airport Road with its signalization. I think Bishop's Lodge Road's project evolved out of this sort of years of getting Bishop's Lodge CRM work orders opened. So, and then there's a category for others. So I would say I'll go back to the traffic calming program. The city has done hundreds and hundreds of speed humps, is generally what people think of traffic calming. It's much more than speed humps. One thing it isn't is stop signs or signals, because those they're not used to control or slow down drivers. They're basically engineering warranted needs based on public safety. So in the last year, we've fielded 26 CRMs that were opened. We've closed 6 of those requests, and 19 of the responses we've given have not been reapplied for. So in other words, the public has gone through the city's policy and has not made an application for their street. So that this policy in that sense is working, because it does require involvement of the community to bring something to the end, to fruition. With respect to stop signs, those are really high priority because they require an engineering warrant study, and because public safety would be involved. Those generally go to the top of the investigation. We've closed 7 of the 11, and we have 4 pending. And not every request for a stop sign. I think some of the ones that are pending are in areas that we don't feel are highest priority. I think there's a request up in Santa Fe Estate somewhere. So let me keep moving. I think I might just slow down and ask if there's any questions about what we've said thus far.
Any questions for Mr. Pacheco? Go ahead. Is that it, or did you have more?
Regina, do you have anything else to add?
I think that gives a sense for the committee about our management of the traffic calming. I think we've been really systematic, really cross-functional, as you mentioned. The team is focused, fair, and consistent. We're being responsive to constituents, and I think that it's going well. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just have one quick question. So there's 89 currently that you're evaluating? I know every time I email about one of these, Director Wheeler, I was just thinking of your first name, forgetting your last name, tells me there's a long list, and I know there's a long list, but this is the long list, correct?
We've closed 29 of the 89.
Okay.
So I think if the
still a long list.
Each category, it sort of shows you what's pending and what we're working on.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pacheco, for helping out. And Director Wheeler, I know that there's priority 1, priority 2, priority 3 routes in the traffic planning study, which are more for ambulance, fire, police to have quick access when they need to. Maybe we can sit down together in the next week or so and take a look at those and see. I know there's a lot of new streets, and maybe we need to update the priority 1, 2, and 3 routes and to include some of the new streets.
Thank you so much. That's a great idea. I'd love to, and I'd bring Leroy as well as probably our Wilson traffic engineer with us to take a look at that. And just to layer on what you said, we didn't mention it, but so priority 1 roads can't have a raised device on them for traffic calming, but there are other things we can do. We're even working with MPO on things like fatter stripes on the side of the road, maybe to, and you know, we've narrowed our standard width of our vehicle lane these days. So we've told DOT we don't want any more 11-foot, 12-foot lanes. We want 10.5-foot lanes. It really does calm traffic because people are just more careful when they have less room to maneuver. So yes, we definitely, the priority, emergency priority routes definitely have a different treatment, and I think it would be great to talk about updating that list. Thank you.
And just to keep something in mind as these requests come up, a couple of years ago on right there near Salvador Pettis Park, they created a road diet, so they put bulb outs for the streets to make the streets 1 lane, and they cut into the bicycle lane. So make sure that if we do that anywhere else, that we're including the Bicycle Trails Advisory Committee, because I'm sure they would want to have some input into those.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairman. It's a funny thing. People generally, I mean, we get both. There's both sides of the coin from the bicycle community. Some people really like it because it really does calm traffic, and some people really don't like it because it crosses the bicycle lane. So it is a work in progress about that. So thank you for raising that, and we'll make sure to continue to coordinate with BPAC.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. We're on to our consent agenda, and I think Councilwoman Romero-Worth has to leave now, so she will be excused for the rest of the meeting. But we're on to the items pooled. The first one is item F. Ms. Diaz, will you read that into the record, please?
Request for approval to award on-call contracts for citywide security services, each in the amount not to exceed $4,400,000, including an MGRT for 4 years with 4 contractors. This is San Bernat.
And Councilor Michael Garcia, you pull this.
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got a couple quick questions for you. One, why is the memo and everything redacted? A lot of that information is blacked out, and it's very, in my opinion, very critical information, like who is being awarded, et cetera. So is there a reason for that?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, as part of the RFP process, until contracts are awarded by the city, the participants or respondents to an RFP, the information that a lot of the information they supply to us is considered confidential. I do believe that if you would like to be able to see all that information, we can work with the purchasing department. Everybody's required to sign an NDA, and then they would release that information to you. But that redaction is standard process for us. My apologies.
No worries. So just to clarify, the RFP process is still open. We haven't awarded, because again, I'm putting my community member hat on, and having the city agree to contract with somebody that I don't know who it is, it's not very transparent. And I would think, is there a reason why we're not waiting for the whole process to close? That way we can say, these were the winners, these were not the winners. I mean, in this case, it seems like there's 5 folks that applied, 4 said yes, 1 said no. I guess, where are we with that process? Why can't we just wait until we close that RFP book, get contracts in place, and put the contracts that can be available for public consumption in front of us.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, this is the final stage in the RFP process. So going through committee and council and finally governing body. Once governing body approves those contracts, at that moment, or actually I think after governing body approves the contracts, they'll receive a few more signatures. I believe the finance director, the mayor, and the city clerk. Once that's done and the contract's filed and receives an official contract file number, it's at that moment that the names of the respondents, their financial information, and all of that data becomes public knowledge. But unfortunately, through this process, it remains confidential. And I think because I understand the question you're asking, and I totally understand the logic, the RFP process itself, well, we submit the information and it seems somewhat opaque. It's that process of setting up a set of metrics to which a respondent has to reply, that a committee inside of the city reviews that information and gives them a weighted score. That in itself is kind of a replacement for that transparency, to ensure that there is a due diligence done by city staff to ensure we're selecting, the appropriate vendors who will provide the quality of services that would best benefit the city. So there's a bit of a trade-off there, but I understand both sides of it. I do understand how it ended up getting set up like that. Right. That helps.
It does, but in my nearly 20 years of dealing with local, federal, state RFPs, never have I ever been asked to approve something where I don't know who the awardee is in a public setting. I know that there are instances where an executive committee or other instances where it's got to be kept confidential, but for the final approval, I can't recall, even on my 2.5 years here on council, where I've ever been put a contract in front of us where it's redacted. Everything else has names, numbers. I mean, there's not a numbers associated with this. It's up to 4.1 million, something like that, and I'm assuming, and that's each of the 4 awardees' contracts. It's very vague, and with that being said, for me to have to go into a confidentiality kind of agreement to understand who I'm awarding resources to should not be the way we're conducting business. I think we should be fully transparent with the public, saying these are the 4 folks that we're going to award it to. This is the one that opted out. These are the 5 folks that didn't cut the mustard. I'm just not comfortable with this, and I've never seen it RFP process procured this way. And so with that, I guess my next question was more around the locations. I know that there's been 11 identified around locations so far. Given, and I think these probably have been priority. I don't know how they've been prioritized. That's a question I have. How are these prioritized over other areas? So I guess let me ask that. How are these folks prioritized?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia. The way the sites listed in this contract, which by the way, at this point in time are just examples, and the contract is not locked into those sites, but can be to any site throughout the city. Essentially, the way that's done really begins in budget season. An entity within the city, for example, me at Midtown will identify I have a security need. I'll identify how much money I need for security. And then in the past, we worked directly with Allied. We'd do an amendment. We'd add services there. What we're trying to do now is create this system of on-call contracts where an entity inside of the city can obtain the funding it requires for its security needs, and then coordinate with one of the 4 providers. We're actually going to expand it and finally include the 5th provider so that you're aware, and they procure it that way. So there isn't actually a prioritization, so to speak, that happens beyond the entity inside of the city itself, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I did read that it's open to bringing on new, and I guess that would be my next question of how do we, and from your response, budget season, et cetera. I know that there's been concerns in the past, and I know that there's been security here in the past. Is that in the plans to bring security here, whether it's during the day or during governing body meetings? I think there's probably some type of security presence in probably the majority of city halls across the state, if not across the country, and I'm surprised we don't have any security presence here, given we collect money, everything that goes on here. So I would like to see if we can make that number 12.
Absolutely. And so, sir, Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, I was asked to obtain quotes from these prospective vendors to provide security at City Hall, both during regular business hours and also to extend into the evening when there are meetings. So that is something that's being looked at currently.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Burnett. I appreciate that. And I know with this recent budget, we allocated resources to have somewhat of a mini PD department down here, but that doesn't, they're in and out, whereas you need a kind of somebody focused solely on protecting whatever's going on here. So with that, I appreciate the update and the information. I'm just never seen a RFP or procurement process this way where it's redacted and the public doesn't know who we're awarding money to until it's already been awarded later on. With that, no other questions, Mr. Chair.
Anything, Councilor Garcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To follow up on that, I guess, my question would be at what point, and if you said this already, I'm sorry if I missed it, but at what point do we know which companies are going to be awarded or given the opportunity to supply the services that are being requested there?
Absolutely. Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, that information becomes public knowledge once the contract is signed and we're officially under contract with the entities. Again, I would like to encourage you, any of the councilors, if you are really interested in knowing who these vendors are ahead of time, we can work with the purchasing office and have everybody sign an NDA, and then we're able to share that information. Without that, unfortunately, staff is limited in our ability to do so before the contracts are signed.
Thank you. So that being said, what's being asked of here is for an approval for the $4,400,000 that will be divided up amongst the companies that will eventually be awarded the RFP.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, each individual contract's dollar amount is $4.4 million. That $4.4 million is then broken down or divided in quarters, so $1.1 million per fiscal year, and the determination to do that was made based on the average annual cost of security currently. Basically, each company, should the city, for one reason or another, be restricted to working with one of the vendors primarily over the others, that vendor would have the bandwidth to cover the majority of our annual security needs.
Thanks. So then you don't have an actual estimated time that these contracts may be awarded?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, I don't think I understood the question. My apologies.
So the companies that are being on contract that we are appropriating or approving this, or we don't know when the RFP process is going to be completed for them?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, we do know that on Wednesday, I'm sorry, I forget the numerical date, is the last time these contracts will appear in these chambers, and then that will be before the governing body. If approved at that time, they'll move on to the mayor and the clerk and, be signed and recorded. And so I would assume, if approved, these contracts will be official and in place by the end of the week, maybe early next week.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Burnett, I was part of the discussion when we talked about why these things had to be blacked out and why certain numbers and vendors couldn't be a part of the process. However, I didn't agree with it then. I still don't agree with it. And one of the reasons is that there have been security companies that have a poor reputation, or that have a background, or somewhere in their background they've done something unethical, immoral in their practices, maybe in their policies and procedures. Did you, since we can't, did you take a look at the individual companies and see if there were any red flags that came to you or whoever the committee was that chose these?
Mr. Chair, the criteria, the RFP criteria or metrics that the individual companies were graded on did not include like a background check into past activities or improprieties. It's basically had to do with, being licensed by the state of New Mexico, all their staff being licensed, references from other entities that they currently provide services for, and things like that. There wasn't a deep dive into their background, no.
Yeah, okay, and that's one of the issues that I have with this, and not really being able to do some of that research on my own. And then, as Councilor Michael Garcia said, just a lack of transparency, I think, and that's nothing about you or the people that are trying to get this through. I think it's just a process that's been defined for us by the city attorney. So I'll have some of that discussion with her. And another note is, if for some reason I had to recuse myself, I wouldn't know who's on this to be able to do that. If I had family on a security company or was an investor in a security company, I wouldn't even know if they were here making a presentation or trying to win an award. So, I'll have those discussions with the city attorney. I know it's not something with you, but so who do we contact if we want to review this? Would it be Fran or would it be your office?
Sir, Mr. Chair, my recommendation would be to send an email directly to Fran, and if you CC'd me, I would help facilitate that process to make sure that it happened quickly.
All right. So, we have a contract, no further discussion. What are the wishes of the committee?
I'll make a motion to not approve this request.
We have a motion to deny. Is there a second?
If I were to second this, what are the ramifications of if this does not get passed through this committee? I just want to know.
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, the two largest impacts to the city. Number one is at the Santa Fe Regional Airport. We are under federal requirement to provide security at the airport. Failure to do so, even for 15 minutes, results in fairly significant fines to the city. Having this security contract in place for that reason alone is incredibly important. A secondary site where security is incredibly important is the Santa Fe Municipal Courts. They actually are unable to open and operate and hear cases without guards present. And so those two alone are important reasons for having a security contract in place. Of course, the other sites throughout the city, for their own reasons, be it the libraries, not convention center, but my brain has stopped working, fitness centers, Genevieve Chavez, Midtown Campus, and sites like that are heavily reliant on security and would likely suffer from not having security present.
Chairman, if I might add as well, Councilor Lee Garcia, what we have now is one company under contract for security, and I believe that contract is expiring.
Correct, on the 30th.
And what this provides is to have a number of security companies to choose from, so that in any application at the city where we need security, we can choose the company most likely to give us the best service at that location. So we have zero security without a contract, which is a huge problem, as Director Burnett has said. But also, we've been really looking forward to, the entire city has been looking forward to this opportunity to really work with other offers in order to fulfill our needs, because we've been rather unsatisfied in a number of places, I think, with the services we've been provided. And one company has not been able to provide the services partly because they haven't been able to hire. So if we can spread our needs out a little bit, we're really expecting to have much better results. And also, we can try a certain company with a purchase order, and then if we don't like those, we can go to one of the other contracted companies. So this was designed to really solve a lot of the security issues, or at least take a really good step in the right direction at that. I think it's fair to say, I'm surprised to see the redacting as well. I wasn't expecting that, and however, really basically all the security companies in the state have responded to this. I mean, there aren't a million, and there are probably 5, and we got all 5. So that's another way to think about what we're doing here, which is that we're making all of the resources available to the city of Santa Fe to leverage on our security needs. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Director. Just another quick question. Based on the availability of security companies that cover the airport, which seems to be the top priority, is there only one? Or, again, in this pool of possible contractors that we don't know who they are because they're locked out, is one of them available to pick up the slack there, I guess?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, further complicating the issue, there is only one contractor who is currently qualified, trained, and certified to provide security at the airport, and that is one of the respondents to this RFP. It is our hope that through, as Director Wheeler said, through diversifying the number of providers we're working with, we're actually able to train new providers to provide services in places like the airport and other locations throughout the city, overcoming the bottleneck we've experienced over the last couple of years and really improving the services the city receives.
Thank you. Going back to my question again, if I were to second this motion that's on the table right now, what does that do to the process of it going on to governing body on Wednesday night? Because I think that's where it's headed, correct?
It passed finance, it would still go on through the governing body.
Okay. That being said, I will go ahead and second the denial because I don't like the fact that we can't see who these are, and that's that reason. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? You're taking a big risk, I think, Mr. Burnett, by waiting till the last meeting of the fiscal year, trying to get this passed, and I don't know, I'm sure there were circumstances that kept this from happening sooner, but this is a a tough one to look at. I hope to meet with Ms. Dunaway tomorrow. That way I can look at it before governing body and feel a little bit better about it. But we do have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Can we have a roll call vote, please? Yes.
Counselor Michael Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
and Chairman Rivera.
I'm going to abstain and take the opportunity to look at the document tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
So motion to deny is approved. Thank you. Next, we're on item H. Can you read that into the record, please, Ms. Diaz?
An ordinance amending section 23-5.2 SFCC 1987 to specify that major commercial events are not entitled to use city property that is otherwise leased by the city. Mrs. Terry Lease.
Thank you, Mr. Lees. Thank you for being here. Councilor Michael Garcia, you pull this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Lees, for being with us. I do have a number of questions, so please bear with me. As we all know, that there is a previous ordinance that I believe sets precedence in regards to how the space should be used, and it's been approved in the past. And so, with that being said, I'm a bit surprised that we're bringing this forward, because we had a lengthy discussion, not you, I don't mean you, that this is being brought forward because we had a lengthy discussion last year on this very same topic, and I thought we were going to come to a middle ground where we both work to support expanding economic opportunities, but as well as honoring the existing agreements we had in place with these major events. So with that being said, how are we determining the timeline? Because I know that historically the plaza has been closed off certain streets during a certain time of year. Traditionally it was Memorial Day to end of October timeframe. I didn't see a time frame in here for in this ordinance that is in alignment with that. So is what's being proposed, the folks that are become leasees would be allowed to use the space year-round?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. So typically, historically, the streets have been closed in the summer, and I don't, so with that being said, they open up in the winter, which would mean spaces such as that we're proposing to be leased wouldn't be available for usage because the streets are back open. And so I don't see a timeline here in regards to when we're going to lease. So with that being said, what is the intention here? Is the intention to now keep, obviously with the two entities that are utilizing space currently, it would indefinitely close Lincoln Avenue because I don't foresee traffic going right by those two spaces. So with that is, how does the timeline work? How does that work? Or is it we begin to shut down Lincoln for as long as it's being leased out?
So, Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, quite frankly, I don't know how to answer the question about street closure. The amendment to this agreement relates to the outdoor dining facility, or outdoor dining leases that we're looking to enter into with certain restaurants. Those restaurants will be required to meet all city codes, meaning fire, historic, land use, and in the street public works as well. So those restaurants are going to be making quite an investment in their outdoor dining facilities on the city property. And so what this resolution does is exempt those outdoor dining facilities that are in the street, that are conflicting with these commercial events. And so what this amendment to the resolution does is exempt the leased areas that are year-round leases. And so what we'll have to do here is these commercial events will have to work with city staff to work around the leased premises. And so, again, I don't know how to answer the question about timing or street closures.
Because I think that it's one in both in that sense. I think that this ordinance is addressing the issue of how it conflicts with the major events, Spanish Market, Indian Market, et cetera. But I'm also foreseeing the additional challenges because we've, in the past, extended these agreements. I think the last time we've created the extension last year, I can't remember exactly when. But what this then does is it sets a brand new precedence for, in my opinion, where these type of business extensions can take place, because it gets into my next question of how are we determining, is it any restaurant in the future? Because my next question is, if a restaurant opens up on San Francisco Street, on Old Santa Fe Trail, are we going to then offer them the same opportunity, which would then take less opportunity away from these great events? And so with that being said, is that the case? Are we limiting it to the current establishments, or we're opening it up to anybody and everybody that wants to open up a restaurant whose space would impact the existing footprint of these major 8 markets, or it's not 8 anymore, it used to be called the Great 8, I think there's only 6 now or so that are left operating. But I guess that's the question. Sorry for the long-winded, but how big are we going to expand this? What is the vision for this?
Okay. So, Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, I think I understand, given that context, what you're talking about. Let me give you a little foundation. And as we all know, that during COVID, there were certain resolutions and accommodations made for the restaurants to try to stay in business, if you will, from COVID. The Alcoholic Beverage Control Board extended their alcohol as well. And so there was a couple of extensions, and the last extension from the ABC terminated April 30th, 2022. And I believe the cities terminated the same. So what we did was we found ourselves in a situation where we have restaurants using city property without an agreement in place, creating an anti-donation issue. So we had been working on lease agreements, and I'll get to the more specific in a minute, but I need to give you the background. And we had 2 restaurants, Plaza Cafe and Cafe de Artistes on Lincoln, that signed those lease agreements, and 2 others that did not. So we're put in a situation that we felt like we had, to have a lease agreement in place because of anti-donation. And so we do have 2 lease agreements in place. The other 2 are signed by the lessees and not fully executed yet. And so to get to your question, yes, that has come up. Can other restaurants ask the same? We had another restaurant on Water Street have a request. We've had a request from one of the retail shops make a request. And what the response there is, these would be taken on a case-by-case basis. And so I guess it's, to answer your question, as far as I know at this point, there's no restrictions on who can request, an outdoor dining facility or use the city property like that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lease. My next question gets around the value of the lease. The real estate market in Santa Fe is at a premium right now. The real estate market on the Santa Fe Plaza is an ultra premium right now. how are we setting these leasing rates? Is it going to be comparable to the square footage of their current rental agreement? How are we determining what we're going to lease the space to?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, you're right, as far as the real estate prices. Most of the restaurants are in what we consider parklets. They'll use the area between the sidewalk and curb, and then the areas out into the street, we call it a parklet. So those are 7 by 21. Cafe d'Artiste, for example, is using 7 by 21. And that really is based on the parking, the value of a parking meter for a year's time. Now, Plaza Cafe, on the other hand, is a little different because they don't have parking spaces there. And you're right. So, in fairness to the Plaza Cafe, the first 7 feet by 21 was given the same rate as the parklet of parking space. Anything over and above that, out into the street or beyond, was marked to market rates. And so for this, because we're in a time situation, we didn't have time to have appraisals done, and we couldn't have appraisals done of different areas. But we did reach out to certified appraisers that we've used in the past, and they have done market rent appraisals, in the plaza area, and they gave us a rate that we felt reflects the lower end of that market on the plaza, definitely higher. So Plaza Cafe, for example, is paying the parking rate for the first 7.5 feet out into the street, and then a much higher rate for the remaining area. So it is marked to, as best we could, to the market.
Okay. And why the first 7 feet at the parklet cost? You said
this concept began with using parking spaces. For example, La Boca and Horno, they have parking spaces. Theirs are tied to parking space sizes. And so those are called a parklet, and those are typically 7 feet by 21 feet. That's the typical parking space dimensions, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. And I guess the last question I do have a lot of questions, but I'll see you in quality of life, so I'll hold some more till then. But the last question I have is, have you been working with any of the 8 great, or not the 8 great, but the folks that are still operating these festivals whose space would be impacted? I know that last summer we had some folks that were very concerned around their space being minimized, even though it was codified in ordinance. And even so, where we could potentially put these markets at jeopardy if we minimize their footprint over time, and if we take away what we have agreed to and minimize that and shrink that. So with that being said, have we talked to any of the major sponsors of these events?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Garcia, I have not spoken with any of the others at the events, or others that may be involved.
Okay. I think it puts us in a very challenging space when we're not trying to work collaboratively with, especially these markets that make Santa Fe what is Santa Fe. I've said this in the past, we could work together to figure this out. I completely understand the economic benefit of having the existing footprint of some of these restaurants be expanded, but we can't forget what has made Santa Fe so special. And there's nothing that prevents, albeit the Santa Fe Fiestas, from picking up shop and moving and having their markets elsewhere. And is that something that we really want as a community? I don't think so, and I don't think that's something that the city should be taking action to ultimately push folks to potentially make that decision. I have a challenge with this, Mr. Lisa, and I wish that we were working as a cohesive unit, the city, the markets, the restaurants, to all work together to say, as I proposed last summer, maybe these restaurants can minimize the footprint, that way it's not impactful, but there's got to be a middle ground, because I think when push comes to shove, we're only opening the door for restaurants to further expand down Lincoln, San Francisco, and Santa Fe Trail, which would then minimize the footprint of these markets, and it puts them in real jeopardy of having Santa Fe being their home. So, with that, thank you, Mr. Lisa. I appreciate the answers and responses tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Lisa.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I wasn't on the on this body when they passed these opportunities to restaurants, and I fully get as to why it was done during the pandemic. Over the past few years, I have many restaurants actually contact me and to say, you know, why are we doing this? Because many of us have spent money and extra money to have outdoor seating in other places, and we don't have that same opportunity. I think we go down, I guess, what you may call a rabbit hole, and I appreciate the comments by Councilor Garcia in regards to where does it end, how this impacts the major events that are now permitted to be on the Santa Fe Plaza. I think it is can be looked at on a case-by-case basis, but if you look at Indian Market, you look at Spanish Market, you look at the Santa Fe Fiestas, you look at all of the events that come, the major events that bring a lot of income to the city. I think it would be fair to ask what type of economic opportunities do these extra seating areas bring to the city over and above what the special events bring, and maybe have a comparison there. But I also have a little bit of trouble with the extra sidewalk and closure of streets because of seating. I know it's for safety. And those are just some of my my observations and what I've seen over the last few years. So kind of don't know where I'm at with this right now. And I think I'll go ahead and those are just my comments and my feelings. If Councilor Rivera has any questions, I'll go ahead and yield the floor for now.
Councilor. So I know when Mayor Javier Gonzalez blocked off the street and put some things there on Lincoln that right along the plaza, that some of these markets had a difficult time with that because that's prime real estate for them. People want to set up on the plaza area, and they have typically had their specific sites, some of them for many, many years. So if you could reach out at least to Spanish Market, Contemporary Hispanic, and Indian Market and see how they feel about this proposal. I'll see this again at Finance on the 5th, so hopefully you'll be able to get a hold of somebody by then. But I would be interested to see how they feel about this proposal. The other question I had was, typically they not throw off, but they ask some of the smaller street vendors that are directly on the plaza, the fajita people, the other people that set up around the plaza, to vacate their areas during all these markets. So would they be allowed to stay as well, or are they going to continue to be asked to leave?
Mr. Chair, the other vendors on the park there, I don't know how to respond to that. I'm not involved with the permitting on those. But here again, and I do understand totally with the markets and its tradition, and it's important, and it draws draws a lot of business to Santa Fe. But I think what happens here is also the outdoor dining areas are popular. Denver, San Diego, and the restaurants here have just expressed a great desire to continue on. There's, I think, an economic benefit there too, but again, I wouldn't know how to quantify that just yet as far as offset with the other markets. But hopefully we get to a point where we can work with the markets, the commercial events, and be able to continue on and accommodate all of them.
Yeah, that's why I asked you to reach out to them to see if what they thought of this proposal and be able to bring that feedback back to financing quality of life as it moves through the process.
Mr. Chair, absolutely. I'll reach out to the Spanish to Indian market and get their feedback.
Great, thank you. So what does the committee wish to do with this? We could move it forward without a recommendation, or we could deny it or approve it.
I'll make a motion to move forward with no recommendation.
Move forward without a recommendation. Do we have a second?
I'll second that. I would like to have a little bit more, as it moves down the process, more information. Again, I'm not very fond of taking away streets and sidewalks that should belong to our public, and that's kind of where we're at, but I'll go ahead and second that for the sake of moving it on.
Councilor Michael Garcia.
Good question, Mr. Chair. Given we changed our rules, how does moving forward with no recommendation impact it? Because I know that we changed, it's got to pass one committee, be on discussion, two committees, it's on consent. Does move forward without recommendation consider us passing it?
I don't believe so. I think, but it still has two other committees that it needs to go through. Okay. I did have another question there, Mr. Lees. Since the fair market value for the property, let's say Plaza Cafe is using, is just for an example, $10,000. Would then $10,000 be decreased from the permit amount for the park, since they're not leasing the entire event space that they had previously?
Mr. Chair, the rate that we're charging in the lease for that is just a straight dollar per square foot per year and is unrelated to whatever's happening within the plaza.
Would then it be prorated then for those 3 days that the event is happening, and that decrease from the permit amount?
Mr. Chair, I can't comment on the permit amount, but the lease rate that they've signed in the lease, Plaza Cafe, for example, is just a dollar per square foot per year, and it doesn't adjust during the times of these events.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I can make a comment.
Councilor Garcia.
Thank you. The other thing that I guess can be taken into consideration is during these events, when these restaurants have, again, that's triple prime real estate, and how does that, it brings in that much more. What does that fall into a valuation equation, I guess you could say, because you will have that many more people there on the plaza during these events. And so again, just a comment, I guess, to be looked at for further discussion. Thank you.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Any opposed, any abstentions? Seeing none, motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Lees. With that, we're on to matters from staff. Director Wheeler.
Thank you, Chairman. No matters from staff at this time.
Thank you. Director Jones.
No matters from staff, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Matters from the committee. All right. Matters from the chair. Mr. Jones, it's been a while since we've had a presentation from wastewater. If you can arrange for something there, just to maybe follow up on some of the issues that had come up at previous presentations and just what's new with them with regards to basically what Jesse went over tonight and what their process is and what they're looking at long-term, short-term and long-term. All right, with that, I guess we'll have to put on hold for a while our trips or our meetings being held at other locations until we go completely live and stop doing things on YouTube and those. And I don't know if they'll ever stop, but we'll have to work around that. Hopefully it'll happen sometime soon, but we'll play that one by ear. With that, our next meeting is Monday, July 11th, and we are adjourned. Thank you all.